Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning September board meeting. I believe we have a couple board members that are joining us by phone. So I just wanted to first check before we start the meeting officially. Mayor Reinbold, President Reinbold. And if you are joining by phone, you may need to press *6. And then we are on the line with the chairman, and we will get him connected here just shortly.
I am here.
Oh, hi, Mayor Bennett. We are ready to call the meeting to order when you are.
Are we all set?
Yes, we are.
All right, I'll call this meeting in order of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. As we are following state law regarding the governor's declaration about having an virtual meeting to ensure transparency, the open meeting is as possible. The meeting materials were posted 1 week in advance. The recording of this meeting will be provided and linked on our website, and all the votes today will be taken by roll call. I remind everybody that to speak or to mute or unmute, you need to just press *6. So, Erin, you want to read the roll, please?
I will. Chairman Bennett.
Present.
Rita Athos.
Present.
Frank Beal.
Present.
President Brawley. President Brawley.
Again, *6 to mute or unmute.
All right. Commissioner Cox. Mayor Darch.
Here.
Jim Healy. Mayor Noak.
Here.
President Reinbold.
I heard him earlier.
Mayor Rottering. I believe she officially told us she was unable to attend. Carolyn Schofield.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Sheehan.
Here.
Matt Walsh.
Here.
Diane Williams.
Present.
And then we have Leanne Redden. It's a non-voting member.
Yeah.
Great. And then I believe, let's see. Oh, I see President Brawley. You're here in attendance?
I am. Sorry about that.
No problem. And then I'll just check one more time. Commissioner Cox. Jim Healy. President Reinbold. All right. I know that we have President Reinbold on the phone here, so we'll give him a call and see if we can follow up. All right.
All right, we have a quorum. Erin, you want to give your report, Executive Director's report?
Yes, I will.
Erin,
we had a couple agenda changes.
Erin, if I can, again, before we begin, if there are motions, we need to have at least a motion and a second that the board members identify themselves. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Mayor Bennett, would you agenda changes and announcements? We didn't have any agenda changes, but we did want to announce that in June, Frank Beal stepped down as the chair of the coordinating committee. Staff reached out to members of the committee and is recommending that President Reinbold take the chair of the CMAP coordinating committee. So the CMAP bylaws give the authority to the board chairman to appoint members to the committees and designate committee chairs. So at this time, our recommendation to the board and to the chairman is that we appoint President Rick Reinbold as chair of the coordinating committee.
Sure, I concur with that recommendation, and we'll appoint Rick as chairman.
Great. And this position is appointed annually, so he will serve the remainder of the calendar year, and then we can talk about reappointing him for the next calendar year. So there's no vote needed on that.
All right, I'll ask for the approval of the minutes from the June 10th meeting. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion, Matt Walsh.
John,
I'll second Rita Athos.
Erin, call the roll.
All right. Chairman Bennett,
Yes.
Rita Athos,
Yes.
Frank Beal,
Yes.
President Brawley,
Yes.
Commissioner Cox, Mayor Darch. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Yes.
Great,
Sorry.
thank you. No problem. Jim Healy, Mayor Noak,
Yes.
President Reinbold, Mayor Roddering, Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Sheehan,
Yes.
Matt Walsh,
Yes.
Diane Williams.
Yes.
Great.
Motion carries. Erin, your executive director's report.
Great. Well, since we last met, the biggest news that I have to share with everyone is that we are out of the Willis Tower and we are officially sort of into the old post office. Almost. So there's still a bit of construction going on here in the office, but we are here. A number of our executive team are here today, trying to continue to get things ready. So while no move is ever easy, I just want to say thank you very much to Angela, her team of Matt Rogas, Ben, Lance, Jessica, George, and Curtis, who have done the lion's share of helping to make sure that this happens in a socially distanced way, but also making sure that our technology was up and running this morning. So we are still working on the refinement of the details, and we will eventually have staff come in and move and unpack their boxes one by one. But again, I just want to recognize the great work of staff and that we really appreciate all of the work that they've done to make sure that we are up and running and the move was very successful. So we also can't wait to welcome you here. So it will be just a little bit longer before the office, we're able to accept visitors, and I think potentially the board members as well. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to preview our new space. So we'll come up with some socially distanced way for you to visit our space. But we've got a few items that are still delayed due to COVID-19. So similar to many places in the loop, we're planning to gradually allow our staff to work from the office as business needs arise. But I'll note that our staff have really been innovative in continuing to serve the region remotely. And I think that, as best we can, we want to continue to maintain sort of health and safety of our employees. So you'll see that we will have minimal staff in the office, like many downtown businesses overall. A couple other things I just wanted to touch on here is that, one of the ways that I'll just highlight that our staff have been really innovating during these trying times is our Future Leaders in Planning program this year was wildly successful. We went from, a completely in-person experience for high school students to an online experience, and the team did a great job in terms of engaging people from across the region and also across the country. So we had over 130 students. We opened it up to high school and early college students to participate in the planning program. We had about 60 participants in each weekly session, which is double the number of students that we had ever had in the office. So, one of the goals of this program is to expose young people to the planning field early and to think about how we can get communities, and students from across the region, diverse backgrounds, diverse minorities engaged in planning early. And I think that we found that this virtual experience allowed us to reach many more students than we ever had in the past. We also, and I'll touch on this a little bit later in the agenda, have continued to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings to our staff. Meeting people where we are, but also recognizing that we have a role as a planning agency to play in advancing racial equity as an organization as it relates to transportation planning and land use planning across our region. But also, really to advance those goals of 2050, which talk about inclusive growth. So, The other thing I wanted to just highlight here is that I've continued to speak to news media outlets about the importance of a complete count, as many of you and your organizations have been as well. We're seeing low numbers across minority communities across the region. And if this continues over the next month, it means that we as a region will have less money, but have to continue to serve the same number of people in our region. And it's an unacceptable outcome here. So we are, doing all we can to engage communities across the region. We've provided our municipalities with a media toolkit and we've been working with our staff to connect with municipalities as well to make sure that they're aware, which I'm sure many of you are. But, as much as we all can be talking about the census, whether it's, on our social media or to our neighbors directly, we really need to make sure that we have the resources we need to do all of the good planning work that the region needs. So then finally, I'll just note that late last week, the state's Public Access Bureau issued a letter providing some advice on the application of the Open Meetings Act related to a closed session that CMAP held to discuss the hiring of the new executive director last May. So in short, CMAP discussed the procedural and scheduling items during the closed session, and this type of information needs to be covered in open session. So there are some exceptions in the law that allow public bodies to go into closed session to discuss personnel matters. However, procedural and scheduling content is not covered in those exceptions. So for more details, I'll be providing the board with a letter that we received following this meeting, and that we will encourage each of you to review it prior to the October meeting. And then on the October agenda, we will be asking the board to take action to open the closed session materials related to that session held on May 8th, 2019. So with that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Erin?
Diane, I have a question, Erin. You mentioned training for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm wondering who's doing that training for staff?
Yeah, so we have been reaching out to a series of consultants who do equity, diversity trainings. We've started with trying to schedule just the quarterly engagement with staff that's more hands-on. So not just you get to watch a PowerPoint presentation and you get a certificate at the end of it. But we've really been trying to bring our staff and then our management team together to have, through Zoom, sort of small group discussions on what we can be doing to support our minority staff internally, but also to support our communities across the region. So we're open to recommendations at this point in time in terms of, if you know trainers that we should be thinking about. I'll also just note too that Tina has in her job description, her director job description, that her job is to help support us in accomplishing our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals moving forward. So I think that accountability from the executive end is really important to me. And so we've been trying to make sure that we're formalizing this and make sure that we're setting achievable goals.
I don't have any recommendations. I'm looking for recommendations.
Oh, well, we can certainly send you the list of people that we've been looking at in terms of trainings. And too, I think one of the things that's critical for us too is everybody's starting this journey at a different place, and so we are trying to find speakers that speak to different people across the spectrum. Right. So we have a wide variety of speakers that we've been looking at. We can get that to you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Erin, just to thank you and staff for that monumental move from the old to the new. I know that was, and certainly under difficult circumstances with COVID and trying to arrange staff to get in there to pack up and then unpack and then eventually get set up. And I know the move itself went fairly well. And we're all looking forward to getting down there at some point in time individually, and hopefully maybe in the near future to meet as a full board. So again, thank you and staff for quietly during this pandemic to move a major headquarters from one building to another. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Under item 5 on procurements and contracts, Angela.
Good morning, CMAP board. Just getting used to the new office here. Today, I'm seeking approval for 3 procurements. At your place is a package with memos, so I'll just speak upon it very quickly. Seeking a vendor limit increase for SPAN, that's CMAP's design integration vendor, in the amount of $1.3 million. In May, the board approved the contract with SPAN for design integration services for our website. The board approved a 3-year contract with 2 one-year options for renewal for a not to exceed amount of $750,000. This amount, however, did not include the unexpended funds we had with our previous vendor, and we did not include the 2 option years. And so today I'm seeking approval to increase this contract limit to an annual maximum amount of $300,000 a year for a total project cost not to exceed $1.325,000. The second procurement, seeking approval to purchase 57 laptops and related accessories with Lenovo in the amount of $82,790.50. If you recall, in June, the board approved the purchase of 50 laptops for all staff to support more flexible work options and to address business continuity during COVID-19. This is the second and final phase of the laptop implementation. So with this purchase, all staff will have laptops for a total of 107 laptops. The final item I'm seeking approval by the board is our annual purchase of data subscriptions in which staff use in its development, projection, and evaluation of land use and transportation in the region. This request is to procure about 14 different data sources from 14 vendors for a total sum of $315,000. This is included in our FY21 budget. So today I'm seeking approval for those 3 procurements, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
First, the chair will entertain a motion that we accept the 3 requests. First,
Motion
I'll have
approve all 3 by John Nook.
John Oak made the motion. Is there a second?
Frank Beal, second.
Frank seconded. Any questions? Erin, I just have one question. Has CMAP sought any possibility of financial aid or relief for COVID-related items that we've had to purchase? Is there anything out there?
You know what? That's a good question. We have, Angela, have we looked at any of that? I'm not sure that we have necessarily, but it is something that we can look at.
We can definitely explore that. Absolutely.
As municipalities know, it's very, very limited as to what we can get reimbursed for, but that's another topic for another time. All right, there is a motion and a second. Any further questions?
Yes, Jerry, Karen Dark question. Just curious as to why it's $1,325,000 and not $1,350,000 if we were doing a max of $300,000 a year on top of $750,000.
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. So what we do is we allow them to expend up to $300,000, but they cannot exceed the vendor limit of $1.3 million. So it would ebb and flow. One year they could spend 200, one year they could max out at 3. So it's really just designed to give them the flexibility, and under no circumstances will they exceed the $1,325,000. But to give them flexibility based on the projects that we have in that fiscal year.
Great, thank you.
Somebody's doing their accounting. Clerk, or Erin, you want to read the roll call, please?
Yes. Chairman Bennett,
Yes.
Rita Athos,
Yes.
Frank Beal,
Yes.
President Browley,
Yes.
Commissioner Cox,
Yes. Yes.
thank you. Mayor Darch,
Yes.
Jim Healy, Mayor Noak,
Yes.
President Reinbold, Mayor Pottering, Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Mayor Sheehan, or Deputy Mayor Sheehan,
Yes.
Matt Walsh, Diane Williams.
Yes.
Great, and it passes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Under item 6, is Mayor Reinbold on the phone, or?
He is on the phone, but I don't believe we're able to hear him. So we are going to ask Stephanie Pfeiffer to give the report for the committee this morning.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. So the coordinating committee met this morning, and we did welcome interim chair Reinbold as our new chair for the coordinating committee. Staff also presented on a new initiative in response to the COVID pandemic called the Local Government Network. And through this new initiative, we're creating personal relationships with the communities, with CMAP staff, and this is an all-agency effort. So it's not just some of the traditional departments that deal with our communities and support our communities throughout the region, but it was really an all-agency effort to really connect members of our staff with our community at large, our region at large. Some of the quick wins that were discussed is we had survey results from 179 communities that helped regional leaders make some informed decisions as it relates to COVID. And we discussed some of the next steps with the committee, including input on how we can shape our response to the pandemic and implementation of ONTO 2050. We also heard an update from CMAP staff on the work that we've been doing on the Equity in Fines, Fares, and Fees project. This is really a comprehensive approach to evaluating multiple aspects of the issue. We're convening partners right now to develop strategies to produce vertical equity in transportation. And the project continues, and we're looking forward to having draft strategies early into the next year. And then finally, the committee discussed what topics and issues they'd like to take on in the coming year, especially with our new chairman. And that's the committee report.
Thank you. And again, Frank, thank you for serving on that committee for your work in the past. And I know Mayor Reinbold will do a great job going forward. So thank you both. Moving on to the Equity Vision and Framework, Erin and Tina.
Great. I'm going to let Tina kick this one off to talk a little bit about what we included in 2050, but then talk a little bit more about where we see us headed and how this work really helps us as we think about the plan update that'll be due in just about 2 years here.
Good morning. Thanks, Erin. You can go to the next slide, Jane. Thank you. So just as a reminder, my name is Tina Fassett Smith. I'm the Director of Innovation and Strategic Alignment here at CMAP. As Erin mentioned before, part of my responsibility is internal diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and I'm also working on our external approach to implementing inclusive growth. So as many of you remember, in 2017, as we were developing ONTO 2050, we convened a resource group of regional experts and developed a comprehensive argument for and a strategy around inclusive growth. In 2018, when this board adopted ONTO 2050 with inclusive growth as a core principle, we adopted a vision to grow our economy through economic opportunity for all of our residents and communities. And then in 2019, after Erin joined us as executive director, as a staff, we voted on 5 core principles to guide our agency. And one of them was the pursuit of equity. And since then, we've made multiple internal changes to better align the agency and our work to that pursuit. Next slide, please. In June of this year, this board reaffirmed the agency's commitment to pursuing inclusive growth and to racial and ethnic equity as well. And so today, I'll go through a couple of recent statistics and talk about the development of an equity vision and framework that we believe is required to make progress and see the vision of ONTO 2050 realized. So in 2016, when ONTO 2050 was developed, the Chicago region had the highest unemployment for our Black residents among 25 peer metro areas. And it came in near the bottom for educational attainment and household income as well. We recently updated these data, and Black unemployment is decreasing faster than white unemployment as of 2018. But Black unemployment in our region is still 3 times larger than white unemployment. And Black unemployment rates are still the worst in Chicago as compared to 25 other metro areas that we've looked at. Next slide, please. And while the education gap between white and Black residents is getting smaller on a national level, it's widening in Chicago. Meanwhile, ONTO 2050 also found disparate outcomes by race and ethnicity in multiple other quality of life indicators, such as access to open space and parks, commute times regardless of mode of travel, home ownership and home value, and access to credit. And this data does not consider the impact of COVID-19 or the economic fallout that has come with it. We've all seen and heard data describing the unequal impact the pandemic is having on communities of color. One small statistic, though with enormous impact, is that as of August 31st, Black Illinois residents made up 20% of the state's COVID cases and 27% of its deaths, despite only making up 14% of the state's total population. Likewise, our Latino residents are making up 36% of statewide cases and 21% of deaths, and are only 17% of our population. Next slide, please. These outcomes aren't unique to just one city or one county in our region. This map may be familiar to many of you. It shows both our economically disconnected areas or EDAs, which are areas with a concentration of low-income residents and either minority or limited English proficiency residents. It also shows disinvested areas. These are areas that have experienced long-term lack of market investment, leading to declining property values, low tax receipts, and shrinking employment. It's important to note that these EDAs and disinvested areas are home to 39% of our region's population, with more than 20% of the region's residents living in an EDA or a disinvested area outside of Cook County. So I'm going to turn this back over to Erin, and she'll talk about the progress we've made so far in implementing inclusive growth and where we believe we need to go from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Tina. Next slide, please. So the consensus was clear in 2018 as it is today. We really will be able to achieve better economic growth, spring back from recession better if more of our residents are included in our economy. So we really believe that we cannot be successful while current trends persist. The consensus has also grown that we must be more intentional about who is being left behind and why, to really think about what the right policies are to put in place and really mitigate the policies that have created these unequal outcomes across our region. So next slide. For us, this has really meant taking a dual path of internal and external actions, which I touched on a little bit earlier. But internally, we've renewed our commitment to pursuing equity with a director level position with a clear mandate to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are developing a 2-year diversity, equity, and inclusion work plan here for staff. We are also committing to continuous training, growth, and follow through as an organization. Like I said, we spent the summer having some difficult conversations and building our capacity to get uncomfortable with difficult conversations about race and determining where we can expand successful approaches to equity in the region, exploring new opportunities to implement equity-focused policies across more of our programs. One step that we did take was to join the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, also known as GARE, which is a network of peer government agencies across the country that are working to address racial equity and allows us access to a number of innovative tools and resources to continue to further our work. Externally, next slide here. We've provided a platform for our committees and partners to discuss equity challenges related to this summer's social justice uprising and COVID impacts. So we've heard from partners across our region who are committed to our committees, who are committed committee members, that they need more data, that there's more policy work necessary to continue, and that they're working hard to assist impacted communities, but that the connection through our committees with their peers, best practices, guidelines, are really important to them. And that also, there's really a need for us to amplify how important a coordinated regional response is to legislators and beyond. So, one of the other things that I wanted to note here is that a number of our programs are already taking equity into consideration, and I think that these are opportunities for us to talk to our peers about across the country, and also for us to continue to improve and build on the processes that we have. So one example is the STP Shared Fund. By including inclusive growth criteria and funding decisions, we're serving more low-income communities. Our embedded staff planner program has really been working with communities to leverage previous good planning work to access funding opportunities like Invest and Cook. The local government network that Stephanie touched on as well, directly reaching out to every municipality in our region to determine their needs and help connect them with the data and resources they might need to do their work better. And then finally, I'll just note we work pretty closely with the counties and specifically Cook County to help think through, the CARES Act funding that they were getting and what portion of that could they be utilizing to assist governments in equitable and performance-based distribution of those funds. So next slide. To help ground us in this work, we wanted to reach out and think about what our peer MPOs across the country were doing. And so, one of the things that we did as we developed 2050 was that we looked at this work that was focused on equity. And so not surprisingly, leaders in the field right now are Portland, Boston, and Minneapolis areas that have seen really, their equity work mature. And so I just will touch on a couple of those things and the work that they're doing here. So next slide. We've got the Puget Sound Regional Council, spurred by their board. Social equity is a key principle of their Vision 2050 plan, and it includes an equity analysis report that evaluates the potential benefits and burdens of transportation policies on communities of color. The agency has also hired a regional equity manager to guide and align external equity focus. So Puget Sound Regional Council has also partnered with GARE, the Government Alliance for Race and Equity that we just joined, to train staff and to develop tools. The next example is the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is Boston's regional planning council. They've tracked regional equity indicators since 2011, coinciding with the release of their first State of Equity report. The agency recently partnered with the Federal Reserve of Boston and GARE to launch a new equity tool for the municipalities it serves. So we're paying close attention to that and hoping to learn from what they're doing. And then the next example is the Metropolitan Council in Minneapolis. So they've been tracking equity indicators focused on progress in the areas of concentrated poverty as part of its Thrive 2040 plan, which was adopted in 2014. Equity is a key principle of their plan, and the progress is tracked and guided by the agency's Equity Advisory Council, which is also a common feature of some of these MPOs that are focused on this work. So the next slide. This leads me to think about our 2050 update. So we have 2050, it was adopted in 2018, but one of the things we need to do as required by federal law is that, we are going to need to update the 2050 plan. And so as we plan to develop and ask you to adopt the 2050 plan, which is no later than 4 years from the time of the original plan's adoption, the purpose of this update is to make sure that we're taking into consideration changes, economic and otherwise, that require adjustments to the goals and strategies of the original plan. So 2050 will need to take into account the impacts of COVID-19 on our financial and transportation systems. And more than ever, to implement and make progress on the goals set forth in 2050, we must focus on policies and strategies that aid and repair a number of the most impacted people and places across our region. So our hope is to do robust public engagement in the summer of 2021 that will ensure that those most impacted are part of crafting the solution. And we want to hear from you as well as we develop this plans, and our work plan then will guide us towards a draft that will be due in the summer of 2022 with a finished project ready in October of 2022. So with that, I wanted to just take a moment and ask for your input and feedback on where we're headed and how you think that what is going on right now and the equity considerations might fit into a post-COVID world that we are looking towards actively, but what role we should have with the board. And I know this is just an initial dipping our toes into this conversation, but one of the things that's been on my mind is bringing the board together for a longer conversation, perhaps a facilitated conversation on the role of race and equity and inclusive growth across the region. So I'll stop and see if there are questions or comments from the board members.
Other questions? Erin, we have discussed the possibility of a quasi-vision session and certainly with the ability of using the GoToMeeting or Zoom, that hopefully we'd be able to get full participation of the boards at a time that that is going to be convenient for everyone to discuss the items you just talked about, especially post-COVID, as to where we fit in the role of this region in going forward. A lot of work was done on the recovery group that was put together. but it's kind of come to not necessarily a dead end, but it has not really gone forward. And I think we offered the role of CMAP to play in continuation of those guiding principles on post-COVID regional areas. So again, that's something the group needs to talk about, and how we would fit in, and how we could help direct the future of the region on all three of the identifiable principles. Questions?
Mayor Bennett, this is Rita. I like the idea of a facilitated session. I think this is a topic that definitely requires more discussion in a time frame where we can really get into it. I appreciate the statistics and the types of things that CMAP is doing, but I think we need a discussion about just so this doesn't just look sterile, another one of our very nicely put together data, but something that we're committed to as we're going forward. And what does that mean for the region? I mean, a lot of it is, we've talked about this for years. A healthy region means that everyone's healthy. And as you start looking at some of those statistics, we're not. So, what are the types of things the board would like to see us thinking about? I'm glad it's in the 2050 plan, but now it's how do we make that real? So I think a discussion is definitely needed.
Good point, Rita. Other questions? Unmute. Somebody's not unmuted.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Erin, for that presentation. I would be remiss if I did not share with the board that CMAP is a partner with the city on our new effort to do a citywide plan called We Will, and We Will Chicago, and it's going to be launched this fall. In fact, I think CMAP will be hosting one of our workshops in September. And interestingly, just to underscore how important the synergy is between the city and the county and surrounding jurisdictions in this effort, the pillars of that work is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We feel, I think, as I think Erin has outlined, these are the issues of our time, and it will be different than the comprehensive plans that were done in the 60s or earlier, where they were wrestling with other issues. This is the defining issue of our era. And so I don't think that what she's outlined is abstract or it's something a nice to have. It's an absolute necessity that both the city and the region get on the same page and have those synergies. So I certainly appreciate the partnership at CMAP, and I think it's timely. And so I will say so I just wanted to underscore that, and I think the notion of not just adopting or creating the policy, but not having any adoptable actions from it. I was actually surprised that the last time the city did a comprehensive plan, it was never adopted by the Plan Commission nor the City Council. So effectively, it's nothing. So we are staging this We Will Chicago as a set of policy recommendations that will be adopted by the Plan Commission and adopted by the City Council, and hopefully be a living document that guides the future of the city. So that I wanted to just say that, and I mean, Erin, if you want to share with the board the other ways in which CMAP is partnering with the city on this effort, I welcome you elaborating on what I've described. But I also want to talk about the other side of this effort, and in terms of how does our annual budget, CMAP's annual budget, how much of it is focused in the geographies where you were describing the greatest inequities. And so if we actually looked at where our grant support, our technical support, and other things that we can do to incentivize equity, where is it going in relationship to the maps that you showed? And I just think that it's almost a mapping of funding, because that may reveal some information to us about whether, our goals for equity are being matched with our annual spend. So that was just one thought I had as you were making the presentation around how do we track equity, and how do we make sure that significant portions of our budget that can catalyze change is being tracked in the geographies where we see the greatest challenges.
Yeah, thanks for that, Commissioner. We will certainly come back to you and, take a look at where all of our resources are going. I think that should be something that's relatively easy. One of the things that we're required to do moving forward is produce a report on the transportation improvement program for the region, where those dollars are being invested. But with this first year passed in terms of the STP reform process, I think we'll have a new call in the winter and another sort of marker as to where we are spending our resources. But as we look at our LTA program too, I know that Stephanie and her team look at identifying which category of need communities are in. But I think an intentional look at that is something that we can certainly do and bring back to the board.
And did you want to elaborate at all on the partnership that the planning department and CMAP have forged in support of the We Will Chicago at work?
Sure. Our staff is very excited to be supporting you all in this effort. And I think one of the things that we've been providing the team to date, your team, is, information on how we've scoped a number of our planning projects to help support sort of you think about sort of the bigger picture. And I know that our outreach and engagement team has also been thinking about how we can help continue to support in that way. But then also, as we look at Chicago as the freight network, where the freight is coming into and how it connects to the rest of the region, we've been thinking about some of those bigger policy areas where we can help tie the connection between the rest of the region and where goods movements are happening, and those sorts of data and information exchanging and sharing. So we're happy to continue to assist.
I have a sort of a follow-up comment to that, because I'm very jealous that you have all of that work going on at the City of Chicago level. And there are so many of us, so many municipalities that are significantly smaller than the City of Chicago, fewer resources and not quite so, I'm going to say, focused as we should be on these kinds of things. So I think one of the things we have to make sure that we do as we think about equity is to make sure we are looking at it really in all of those different venues, so that we don't just really get the City of Chicago on track and then leave everybody else behind. I think it'll be important that whatever is learned and whatever data is looked at and the kind of thoughts that transpire are also shared with other municipalities. I think that the work we're doing on transportation makes sense, and I'm prayerful that we'll get Metra and other agencies to agree to something when we come to a final point. It is something concrete, though. It is something that can actually be done and make a difference. And I agree with Maurice that we really need to make sure that all of the things that we plan look like that. But when I talked to Erin a little bit about some of these things, we talked about the distribution of the care funds through the county, and the formula that was used, which is really a sort of a CMAP recommended formula for looking at equity. So that some of those communities that received money, in fact, got those who had greater need got more money. And now we have to worry that those people know how to actually use that money. It's a reimbursable plan. It requires that you spend first and then collect later. You're going to have to make some pretty sophisticated decisions about what you're going to do with that money. And I think a lot of those communities that got more because they need more will also need more assistance in making sure that they can do the right thing and carry all of that forward. And so there are lots of different layers, I guess, is what I would say. as to how we think about this. And when we do it, we have to think it all the way through the implementation process.
Again, I think that understanding how the CARES Act resources were distributed and how they were being used would be really helpful data. I know that the CARES Act resources that the city had access to, $11 million was done for long-term public health support in the facility, a facility, a healthy hub, 20,000 square foot facility in Auburn Gresham received $4 million to bring that online. That's going to produce jobs. It's going to have long-term public health care, a vegan restaurant. It was used for economic development. And the other was $7 million that was going to Mount Sinai, an outpatient resource facility on Ogden. And so while there were many short-term, responses to COVID, we opted to invest in 2 long-term public health investments that will be here for decades on. And so it would be just interesting to understand in a region how those CARES Acts were distributed and what they went to, because it was a very conscious decision to not just respond programmatically into the immediate need, but to actually invest in long-term things that will structurally change, public health in those communities in need.
Other questions? Erin, thank you. Moving on to the next item, and it's the mobility recovery focus. Laura, are you going to do that one?
Yes, I am, Mayor Bennett. Thank you. Again, Laura Wilkeson. I'm a Deputy Executive Director here at CMAP, and I'm excited to share with you today about our mobility recovery work, and then hand it over to RTA to have them talk about some of the recovery planning that they are doing as well. So I don't need to tell anyone here that the pandemic has significantly impacted our region's transportation system. And as the MPO, we've been actively monitoring and reporting on the travel trends in our region. The data that we have leads us more questions than we can ask and answer, but we need to do that in order to develop a strategy and an action plan to aid in a more equitable recovery. So first, I want to do a little bit of reflection on where we are now. So if you look at the travel trends since March, again, not surprising, we've had some huge declines in traffic, but we're seeing that traffic and congestion are returning to our roadways. Traffic volumes overall are still down about 10%, and that also includes passenger vehicles, which is stabilized around 10% below COVID levels or pre-COVID levels. Heavy trucks, as you can see here, had the shallowest decrease early in the pandemic, but they've returned to previous conditions. Single unit trucks, which is mostly but not entirely delivery vehicles, they were down 27%, but as you can see, they stabilized at 10% above COVID levels, which we could assume has some relevance with the increase in e-commerce. So it's interesting to see what's happening on our roadways today. And we ask how that translates into the safety that is happening. And we're using the City of Chicago data here. Serious injuries have grown less slowly, mostly due to the reduced traffic volumes, which is great for both vehicle occupants and bicyclists and pedestrians. However, fatalities have actually gone up relative to last year. And we're hearing this from our partner agencies across the United States as well, which is very concerning. And we can assume that this is due to increased speeds with the reduction in traffic volumes. One of the other things we've been looking at, obviously, is transit and what's happening with transit ridership. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because our partner RTA is here today and can talk more about what's happening with transit. But as many of you know, ridership is still down over 60%. And we have a lot of concerns with transit ridership and how that impacts the entire system. We have concerns with congestion, funding, air quality, and still a lot of this has to relate to what we're trying to do in our 2050 goals. So again, I will leave it up to RTA to share some more information about that later in the presentation. One of the other trends that we have been looking at is who's moving around. And I believe Erin shared some of this information, and we have in policy updates before, as we saw disparities in who was moving around the region early in the COVID crisis, which led to some of our policy updates about essential workers, again, early in the pandemic, and that is slowly starting to equalize as people begin moving around the region again. So we are left with a lot, again, of questions about what is the future going to look like. So we have taken some information from other different data, and one of that is what's going on with the business community. What will commuting look like? What will return to work look like? What is telecommuting? Are we still going to have central business district, hub and spoke system? So some of the information that we have been looking at came from going through the City of Chicago's Business Impact Survey. And you can see that of those surveyed, less than half of the respondents indicated that they plan to bring their employees back to work by 2021, and only 1/3 of the large businesses plan to do that. They also indicated changes in how their staff will be relating to going into the office and shifting working hours. So we looked at this and hearing from a lot of our municipalities and different people throughout the region that some people are like, well, we'll just drive instead of dealing with transit. And so we took a look at what that might look like. And so if we look at 1 in 4 transit riders, or about 25% of the pre-COVID transit trips were replaced by car trips, drivers would then see 193,000 extra hours on the road every day, and we would have a loss of 1.2 billion annually in productivity costs. And you can see that that spreads the congestion around the region, and everyone would feel the impacts by people just returning to cars. So again, this leaves us with a lot more questions than we have answers for. And we feel like it's important that we still reach our onto 2050 goals, but in this new reality, as Erin mentioned before, how do we take this opportunity to reach those goals through this new lens? So we are going to embark on a mobility recovery project where we're going to bring on a consulting team to work with staff to support an equitable recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. This strategy will work to mitigate a likely rebound in congestion, sustain the transit system, and increase the resiliency of the region's multimodal transportation system. Our primary objective is to develop a mobility action plan that can be used for policy and programmatic changes for everyone from local, regional, and state and federal levels. All of this, again, is to complement and lead into our 2050 update work. One of our core values is to drive innovation, and we really believe that this is the opportunity to do that while staying the course that Onto 2050 set for our region. I'm happy to answer any questions and have a discussion about this, but before we do, I'm going to hand it over to Leanne Wren and RTA to talk about their complementary work as they approach the transit system for the future. Leanne?
Thanks, Laura. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for including me in this item. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes and hit on a couple of key points. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica in a minute, and she's going to really talk more specifically about our recovery scenario planning work that we're doing. So, but I just want to step back a little bit and give you some context for, as I think we've all talked about this very unusual time we are in, specifically in transit. So we're living through very unprecedented times. That's probably becoming overstated I think, or stated too often. But it's particularly challenging for the transit network, and ridership and revenue are at all-time lows. We are still, though, providing nearly 500,000 essential trips every day, and that's the combination of CTA, Metra, and PACE. We know that transit is critical, not just to provide riding today, but it is also very critical to the overall economic recovery of the region. And we want to be prepared for what is going to lie ahead. And much of that we don't really know. We don't have a certain look at what the future really is going to look like. So for this reason, the RTA is working on several recovery planning activities, and they're all being guided by a region's strategic plan and Invest in Transit strategic plan. I just want to touch on 3 quick points. First, of some of the work that we're doing. So first, we are monitoring the transit system's status and communicating about it through the dashboard and e-blast feeds. They have been happening weekly, but we've pushed them out to about every 10 days to 2 weeks at the current rate of the way things are changing. Many of you are actually signed up and receiving those updates on a regular basis. Secondly, we're also coordinating with several recovery efforts led by partners such as the City of Chicago and the County Board Chairs. Laura just touched on the survey work that was completed with the City of Chicago, the Chamber of Commerce, and Transit on trying to get a better sense on some of the travel activities that are having around the region as we're sort of moving through this pandemic. And thirdly, or finally, really, and perhaps probably I think the most important is that we have been working to provide funding stability to the 3 operators. So largely due to the $1.4 billion in Federal CARES Act relief to our region that we received in May, the operators to date have not been affected by the loss of revenues from decreased fare and sales tax receipts. But those federal dollars are dwindling, and without further federal funding, a reckoning for the transit system is going to come probably early to mid-21. So the annual budget process, which is underway for right now, will take this reality into account. And just for clarity, the region's transit system is on an annual, our fiscal year is also a calendar year. So we need to adopt a budget by 2021. Tomorrow, our board's going to consider what we call the funding marks for the transit agencies for 2021. And that's really the expected or maybe this year hoped for public funding that will be received. But it's very clear to all of us that it is not going to be a normal budget year, and there's a lot of, really a lot of big challenges ahead. Our transit leaders need to strike a balance by assuring riders that they can continue to count on public transportation while speaking frankly about the significant shortfalls that we are facing. And those shortfalls are very likely, as you know, all our 3 operators say regularly, we don't have many levers to pull. There's really only 2, and that's some kinds of combinations of service cuts and fare increases. And in the time of a pandemic and an economic crisis, we certainly don't want to have to deal with any of those bad options. And that is certainly, though, going to be our reality if additional federal relief doesn't emerge. So we know that business as usual isn't an option, and we need to rethink how the dollars are being allocated for a very different future that is still largely unknown to all of us. So the scenario planning work that Jessica is going to talk about in a minute is going to tell, she's going to tell you a little bit about how we're providing structure for that conversation. We've already gotten feedback from our board that should carry that really we're going to use really as we continue to talk more broadly about change that will provide the next generation of improvements to the transit system. So we're still working through the next steps of that project, and we're anticipating that there will be more to come, and we will want to engage our regional partners like CMAP and others in that effort as we move forward. I know Erin's going to probably take some questions at the end of this, and Jessica and myself will stay on. But with this, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, and she's going to walk you through a quick look at some of the work that we're doing more specifically in the scenario planning work. Jessica.
Thanks, Leanne. Good morning, Chairman Bennett and the members of the CMAP board. I am Jessica Hector-Sue. I'm the Director of Planning and Market Development at the RTA. And as Leanne mentioned, I'm going to tell you a bit more about a scenario planning project that we've been doing. But before I do that, I want to remind you or tell you about the fact that our board adopted our current regional transit strategic plan, Invest in Transit, 2 years ago. This was a collective effort between the RTA, the service boards, and regional partners like CMAP, and has very much guided our work since its passage. The plan cast a very bold vision for transit as the core of the region's transportation mobility network. And it also talked a lot about the need for ongoing long-term sustainable capital funding, which we made a lot of progress toward last year with the passage of Rebuild Illinois. And we really intended for this year to be about the strategic plan and achieving our goals there, and also about capital investment. But obviously in March, everything changed. Next slide, please. So when the stay-at-home order was issued starting in March 21st, we saw very quick changes in our economy, in movements, in perceptions of public health. Laura spoke about many of those things, and we saw some specific impacts to transit. So first, transit use changed significantly and shifted from being a service that many kinds of riders ride to one that's really providing mostly only essential trips. And this chart is from our COVID dashboard, and it shows that ridership really fell off a cliff, frankly, in March. And as of late August, it's still down around 66%. Along with that, the agencies also had to really shift their focus in March to manage this public health crisis and all of the new demands that came with it. They ramped up their public communication significantly, and they made operational changes like waiving fares for a while and implementing rear door boarding to keep both their employees and their customers safe. They also had to make some service changes. So CTA as of August hasn't made any, but Metra is operating about half of its regular service, and PACE is operating with reductions to about 99 of their routes. So major changes. And last but not least, as Leanne mentioned, transit funding has also been impacted. Two of our key sources of funding, sales tax revenue and farebox revenue, were on par with previous years in January and February. But by March and April, both of these had dropped off significantly. And fortunately, the CARES Act funding will provide about $1.4 billion, as Leanne mentioned, that we'll use to cover some of those unexpected costs and these operating deficits. But it's unclear whether there will be any additional federal funding. So we're under pressure to make this money last. And it's a huge challenge for local transit. Fortunately or unfortunately, most of our national peers and international peers are also in similar situations, so we're not alone. But the timing and extent of the transit system recovery is really very uncertain. Next slide, please. So as a result of this, and in order to help navigate some of this uncertainty, we've been working on a scenario planning project. And in this project, we've developed several different scenarios or kind of views of the world. And for each scenario, we've asked how they will impact the overall economy and kind of transit funding in kind, how they will impact commuting and who is traveling overall to work versus who's working from home. And then transit mode choice. So for the folks who are traveling or commuting, are they choosing to take transit? And we developed a couple of analytical tools to estimate the impact of each of these scenarios on transit funding relative to 2019. We're focusing on funding here because that really helps us see how much buying power we have and essentially how much service we can put on the street, which helps us understand how much mobility we can provide. Next slide, please. This scenario planning is really not about getting the right answer. We have a lot of other spheres in which we need to do that, like the budget process that Leanne was mentioning. But this is really more of a helpful way to talk about some different features and to think about how they each would impact transit and think about what kinds of actions we might need to take to prepare for the future. It's not used to manage the current crisis. The agencies are doing a fantastic job with that. It's also not about kind of predicting the likelihood of one of these occurring. Well, we're not doing that. We're really we're not forecasting behavioral change like CMAP often does with your model. We're instead really using this to talk about what might be ahead. Next slide, please. So we developed 6 scenarios in the project, ranging from a stalled economy on one hand, in which people aren't working or traveling at all on one extreme, to a more positive future in which sustained shared travel kind of bounces back in the economy along with it on the other extreme. Today, we're going to focus on 3 of them and talk a little bit about them in more detail. It's important to note that none of these 3 and none of the 6 assume that we're going to return back to the way we were in 2019. All of them assume some higher level of teleworking and shifts in behavior, partly based on the survey results that Laura and Leanne both mentioned from the City of Chicago and the Chamber. So from left to right on this slide, we have a scenario where we're talking about the stalled economy on the left, congested recovery in the middle, mix on the right. Again, those are the bookends with kind of one in between. I'm going to go through each one of them now. So next slide, please. The first scenario is called we call the stalled economy scenario. And just to orient you to the slide, on the right we have three sliders representing these three impact levers: the economy, commuting, and transit mode share. And we're using the circles on the sliders to show how these levers change relative to 2019. So a circle above the line means that this lever is performing better than 2019. A circle below the line means that it's performing lower than 2019. And on the left, we have a description of that narrative that talks about the scenario in terms of what's going on in the US overall, when the scenario could likely occur, and how this might occur, and how the regional transit system is kind of prepared to navigate this kind of scenario if it does occur. You'll see some differences between the scenarios when we talk about these three things. So going through the stalled economy scenario on the slide here, the narrative is that the US plunges into an economic depression and unemployment is high and travel is depressed overall. So the economy, commuting, and transit mode share are all lower than they were in 2019. This unfortunately could happen in the near term. It could happen really any time. And our current transportation policies don't prevent this from happening, and they won't help us to navigate it effectively if it does happen. Next slide. The second scenario we call the congested recovery scenario. And in this scenario, the US economy actually rebounds to 2019 levels, but more people continue to telecommute, and the people who do commute are choosing to drive. Like the previous scenario, this could happen in the near term. It could happen anytime. One might argue that we're seeing a little bit of this right now. Again, Laura pointed out that car travel is increasing more quickly or recovering more quickly than transit. We might be seeing some of this already. And again, our current transportation policies don't prevent this from happening. Conceptually, we know we don't want it to happen, but there's really nothing to prevent it from occurring. And we aren't really in a good place as a region to navigate this. We aren't really in a good place as a transit system to navigate it if that's the direction that we just sort of let the market go. Next slide, please. And the third scenario that we're going to talk about today is the regional remix scenario. In this scenario, the US economy rebounds and actually exceeds 2019 levels. So we're in a good place. More people are probably still telecommuting. That's still below, commuting overall is probably below 2019 levels. But people who are moving around are choosing to take transit more often. And unlike the previous scenarios that could occur anytime, this one's probably a little bit further out. This is probably 2 to 5 years out when we have a vaccine for COVID, when our society's kind of had a chance to recover overall. And this outcome, unlike the other two, is actually envisioned very clearly in our current plans, but it would require some actual steps toward putting some of those policies we talk about in place to actually make it happen. The kinds of policies that both fund the transit system and incentivize people to use it rather than getting in their cars in order for it to occur. So these three slides represent kind of the inputs to our estimating tools that I mentioned. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll actually talk about the outputs of our tools. So this slide looks at how much funding we might have available in each scenario. Again, this is not about getting the right answer, it's about having a conversation. So again, to orient you, there are 3 bars on the slide, each representing a year of total funding available for the transit system in each scenario. And the light gray bar is public revenue based on the taxes we're collecting in state funding. And the dark gray part is for system revenue, which is mostly fares. The blue line represents the 2019 baseline that we're kind of working against here. You can see from the slide that the stalled economy scenario, we estimate having as little as 45% less funding than we do today, or buying power than we do today for the transit system, because the economy is not doing well and people are not traveling, so nothing's looking good. In the congested recovery scenario, we estimate that we could have as little as 20% less buying power than 2019. And in this case, public revenue is largely recovered because the economy is doing well, but people are not riding transit. So our system revenue is not doing well. In the third scenario, the regional remix scenario, we estimate that we could have close to what we had in 2019, maybe even a little bit more, 5% more buying power than we did. Although, again, that one is unlikely to occur. The first two could happen on their own. The third one is unlikely to occur unless we as a region take some steps toward that. On the next slide, we show these three estimates alongside where we are in 2020. So this shows a projection of where we think we'll land in 2020 relative to 2019. We're expecting about 25% less funding. Again, CARES Act funding can be used to make up that difference for now and for part of 2021, but time will tell whether we'll have more of that. And you know, in any given, just for a little bit of context, in any given year, a 1 or 2 or 3% difference in our funding levels is a lot of work to accommodate. So talking about a 45% or a 20% reduction in funding is very significant for the transit agencies. So moving on to the next slide. We shared this work with the RTA board in August, and since then we have held 2 virtual workshops and distributed a survey to gather input from stakeholders about how they think the transit system may need to adapt to the future. We're going to share what we've learned from that so far with our board tomorrow and talk to them more about what's next. And as Leanne mentioned, I think we're still working through what's next, but we appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. We'd be happy to hear your thoughts about recovery either in a minute when the opportunity arises or in some kind of follow-up discussion. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Laura and to Erin.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Leanne and Jessica, for sharing this important information with our board. I know that one of the things I think about is just sort of the ripple effects of our interconnectedness here. So, again, Leanne and I are happy to take any questions of board members. I think that we are most interested in hearing a little bit about what you're seeing in your communities, hearing from your business communities, and just general concerns about mobility and transit recovery and things that we should be focused on as we embark on, continuing to understand what this is going to mean for our region's future.
Erin, just a short comment. I gather this is happening nationwide, correct, Leanna?
That's correct.
Yeah, get that mute button. Sorry, yes, Chairman Bennett. You're correct. It's actually not just nationally, but internationally. And our dashboard that we put out and keep regularly posted and updated on our website is tracking actually some of the international peers as well. So I don't know if it's good to say that it's common that it's happening across the globe, but we aren't alone in this. And transit, I'm also very engaged nationally, working with transit partners across the country, and I'm working actually on the national task force sort of for transit recovery, just to sort of better learn from peers, share issues, and really focus our efforts, both especially with Congress as it relates in the very immediate term to making the case for additional funding, because that's one of the challenges that we're facing is sort of a bit of the transit paradox is while ridership is still low, it is so fundamental to carrying essential workers, but also the level of service to provide social distancing, is really stretching the service boards very thin. And that's why in the immediate term, to some extent, we need to be working to sort of support and prop up the transit system while we let while the pandemic plays out and we look at what the future might bring to us. Because really much of this is being done to us. It's not really anything that we're doing of our own sort of choices, our own choices.
That was the point of my question, is that to share knowledge or the collaboration of other metropolitan areas in the nation to put heads together and to see from a national standpoint how it can be approached going forward. Obviously, you've indicated you're in contact with other national peers, so I would hope that all these regions are putting their heads together as to predicting or somehow figuring out how we're going to go forward, because it almost sounds like we're back to scratch or day one in building a public transportation system that's literally not being used. Other questions?
I just a comment. Thank you for this presentation. It was really helpful. I can say, and I think some of this was alluded to in the presentation, that here in Chicago, obviously we have a lot of people who are still teleworking, but those who are still coming into work, we're trying to work with the business community to promote CTA. Obviously, it can be a bit of a challenge. I think folks are kind of walking the line of trying to keep people safe and social distanced on various modes of transportation. And so we're hearing from folks that the city needs to continue to work to build confidence in commuters about how clean and safe our modes of transportation are, buses and trains. And so we're working to do extra cleaning and obviously try to enforce mask wearing where possible. And we're having a lot of meetings with schools and business community to try and promote what we're doing. We're also working on a new marketing campaign to try and engage people and bring them back onto CTA. And then we are also looking at taking advantage of sort of the lower amounts of traffic in some of our busier residential corridors and looking at some pop-up bus lanes. And so we'll be working to roll those out. And so we're really trying to make particularly the bus commute faster for folks so they can feel not only attracted from getting an ability to get to work faster, but also less time you kind of have to spend in an enclosed space with other folks during the pandemic. So just trying to bring people back to CTA in those ways. But we're also seeing a lot of folks that are taking advantage of divvy, particularly during the nice weather. A lot of people are cycling. And we're also seeing people taking scooters. So folks are finding other ways beyond cars and buses. And so we're trying to kind of meet the need in various ways, but also trying to bring those commuters safely back onto CTA. So thank you for all of this. Is very helpful.
Just one last point. I still, obviously, we all believe that this is going to be health and science driven as to the safety aspect and competence of people using public transportation. But I think the real key that we need to work with is going to be the business community and as to whether or not their future is going to change about commuting or required commuting to the workplace. And that I think is significant as not necessarily a wait and see, but working with the business community to find out, in fact, whether or not they are going to go back to normal and how that impacts, the main business districts or where employment is taking place. So I think, again, a vaccine coming is going to, again, begin to build confidence in using the system itself, but who is going to be using that system going forward as to getting to work.
Chairman Bennett, if I could just add a comment to that. Just so you know, too, we are continuing to work with the business community. Both Laura and myself referenced the survey work that we did in partnership with the City of Chicago and the Chamber. We, in the transit space, are actually looking to put together that ongoing dialogue and that relationship with the business community. We're pulling together a forum in the coming weeks that will be a smaller forum to really have sort of, to some extent, a safe dialogue back and forth between transit and the business community as their thinking is evolving and changing, so we can both sort of react to and then sort of partner with them in many of their activities and actions. And so we continue to stay very engaged. And then the hope is to just kind of keep that dialogue going and be using it, informing ourselves as we go through our scenario work and future budget work as well.
All right, great, thanks. And I know there'll be continuing discussions with this going forward. We should probably move on. Let's move to item 9 on the election of officers. Frank, you have a report?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. At a previous board meeting, you appointed a nominating committee to make recommendations for the new executive committee for next year. That committee included Nancy Roddering and Rick Reinbold and myself. We met a few weeks ago and have a recommendation for the full board. That would include Jerry Bennett as chair, Carolyn Schofield as vice chair, and Sheehan as vice chair. And the members of the committee would include Diane Williams, Rita Athis, and John Noak. And we're pleased to offer this as a slate for the executive committee.
Is there a motion to accept that recommendation?
So moved, Karen Darch.
Second?
Second, John Noak.
Moved and seconded. Any other further questions? Erin, read the roll call, please.
Yes, Mayor Bennett,
Yes.
Rita Athis, Frank Beal,
Yes.
President Brawley,
Yes.
Commissioner Cox,
Yes, thank you.
Mayor Darch,
Yes.
Jim Healy, Mayor Noak,
Yes.
President Reinbold, we have on the phone out here. He says yes.
Let's hope so.
Mayor Rattering, Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Sheehan,
Yes.
Matt Walsh, Diane Williams,
Yes.
and just go back here. We will see if we can get in touch with I think we need to follow up with Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh, you on the line still? Well, we are one vote short at this point in time. We'll work on our end to see if we can get Matt back on the line. Do you want to move forward while we do so, Mayor Bennett?
Sure, no problem. All right.
Okay.
Under legislative update, Laura and Gordon.
Great. In the interest of time, I am going to give you some of the highlights, but I'm happy to answer any questions or provide information that anyone might have, especially around the transportation reauthorization, our federal appropriations, or COVID relief. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good news to offer in that both the transportation reauthorization and annual government spending are set to expire at the end of this month. We expect that we will be having a continuing resolution that will move these pieces of legislation until after the election. In addition, we know that including our region, along with other state DOTs and transit, are looking for additional COVID relief. And there is still work being happening in DC about what that would look like, but there is no progress right now as the White House and congressional discussions have stalled. So again, if there's additional information anybody would like about those pieces of legislation, we'd be happy to provide. As Erin mentioned in the beginning of this discussion, we have been doing outreach around the census. We've been monitoring their decision to shorten the non-response follow-up outreach. We sent our own letter to the Illinois delegation requesting the extension to really ensure an accurate and complete census count. And we also signed on to a joint NARC, AMPO, and NATO, our different associations related to MPOs, to congressional leadership for that extension as well. Just to put this in perspective, we put out a policy update that if we were to get a undercount in this area of 5% less than the population in 2019, that would have actually equated to a loss in Illinois of $235 million in the CARES Act funding. So we wanted to be explained to communities what that would actually have translated into if we had had a less complete count. And so we really, again, are trying to push that the census has a complete count this year, and we have time to do that. On one positive note to end up, we have been working and maintaining to maintain our relationships with our congressional delegation, providing research and analysis in order for them to shape policy. We had noted at the beginning of this year that we wanted to restart our delegation briefings for both district directors and DC staff. And we have an upcoming briefing where we're going to be working with the congressional delegation through Durban and Duckworth, that briefing. And that's really going to be focused on the COVID relief and recovery analysis and research that we've been doing to help our congressional delegation deal with these issues at hand. And I will turn it over to Gordon to provide an update on the state work.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. So the report that you have in front of you is basically a recap of my June report, which talked about the shortened legislative session, the state passing a budget, and at this time the governor has signed all those things. So the operating budget and the budget implementation bill are both signed and in place and operating. The only things really to report are, upcoming veto session will take place in November, the week of the 17th, and the second week will be December 1st. It's questionable whether that will actually happen, given there's not much for them to do at this point in time. So we'll keep our eyes and ears open to any updates, and we'll share those with you accordingly. Summer activity has been really limited to Anthony and I reaching out to members of the General Assembly to talk about different legislative initiatives that the agency has before them on to 2050 and so forth. And I also wanted to just share with you, we are now in the process of developing an update for both our federal and state legislative agendas and making any adjustments to the framework document that you've all become accustomed to seeing. You will probably see the first iteration of that in late November. But that's all I have to report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions on the legislative report? Okay, fine. If not, under other business, if there's any other business. Before we get into public comment, I would remember the board, according to the plan here, is that after the public comments, we were going to go into an executive session. You need to get off this webinar, and there's a call-in number, a conference call number, right? Am I getting this right so far? So you immediately need to call in for that executive session number. It's strictly by teleconference. And then that meeting will then direct us to our business there. And the board will then hopefully authorize me to come back to this forum and adjourn the meeting on my own, so the board members don't have to do that. After the meeting is adjourned, those on the executive committee must immediately then go to the webinar you've been given to click into the executive session or executive committee meeting after that. I guess that's how that's going to run, Erin, right?
That is. So
Okay.
we will need approval for going into executive session, and then also approval from the board for the mayor, chairman, to come back out and close the meeting himself.
All right, before I do that, is there any public comment? None being? No? All right.
Oh, yes, we actually do have public comment. Heather Armstrong? Who, Heather, if you're on, needs to unmute yourself, Heather, if you're
Okay.
Great, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, like one thing CMAP needs to check on is housing, because other parts of the Midwest, they have it where it's very easy to get housing. And they want to like get housing here in Chicago, but they cannot get housing because of the corrupt politicians in the city and in the state.
Thank you, Heather.
And Garland wants to speak.
Yeah, Garland Armstrong, how you doing, Erin?
Good, thank you.
All right. For when you have the next remind Pace make sure once the post office is completed, tell them to make sure have the drop off and pickup, especially once this pandemic clears and the new post office, you need to make sure those who are visually impaired and those in power wheelchairs will be coming to the post office for the next ADA meeting so that they can get the heads up for it and be well prepared for it. So, because they want to make sure how will it be, and once Pace calls y'all and gives you the green light to come on in, how will they know where the drop off and pickup is going to be so that they'll know that what their rise is going to be, and the ADA general public would be there too also. So how will you be able to connect? How will you make sure to contact Pace that everything is a go?
Good point, Garland. I know that we'll be working closely when meetings do resume in our space. So, however, just due to COVID-19, we know at this point it'll be a little while before we end up inviting other people into our space for public meetings. So, but it's on our mind and on our list of things to do.
Okay, so once everything is once this pandemic clears and everything else, so everything will be a go, and then y'all make sure to accommodate those in power wheelchairs and other things, visually impaired and other things too, so that they can be ready. And especially those who are hard of hearing too is coming also too.
No, thank you for the reminder.
Okay, all right.
Any other comments?
One more public comment? I'm being told we have one more. Oh, Obayi.
Hello, how you doing, everyone? Hey, this is Obayi Reed with Equiticity. We're a racial equity movement headquartered in Chicago, operationalizing racial equity in our city and across the country. First, I just want to say thank you to Erin and CMAP for advancing racial equity at the organization. And with regards to your work with GARE, I really want to encourage you all to work directly with community-based organizations who've been on the front line of racial equity in this city, in addition to your work with GARE. Equiticity does have a framework. It's called the Equiticity Racial Equity Statement of Principle. I would love to speak with you all more about that and see how that is rolled up into the work you're doing with GARE and even separately from GARE. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If that's it for the public comment, I remind the board our next meeting is Wednesday, October 14th. And again, it's an important meeting. That's when we will meet in a joint meeting with the MPO Policy Committee. As always, that's a very important meeting. So hopefully everybody will, it'll really be a combined meeting of about 50 people. So good luck with the GoToWebinar set up for that one. Anyway, I'll ask the board, Erin, you want to call the roll that we go into executive session?
We are checking to make sure that we don't have to count the vacancy as part of our quorum, but why don't we go ahead and call the roll anyways to go into executive committee or executive session. Mayor Bennett?
Yes.
Rita Athos?
Yes.
Frank Beal?
Yes.
President Browley?
Yes.
Commissioner Cox? Mayor Darch?
Yes.
Jim Healy? Mayor Noak?
Yes.
President Reinbold? Mayor Roddering? Carolyn Schofield?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Sheehan?
Yes.
Matt Walsh? And Diane Williams?
Yes.
Okay,
at
the motion carries. So Erin?
Actually, at this point, Mayor Bennett, I think we are just shy of a quorum here. So we should postpone the executive session to our next meeting.
Oh, okay. And that vote will hold on the committee recommendation until next meeting also, I gather.
You know what? We were good on the committee election of officers. But
Well,
we've had
all right, well, the chair will declare that the motion carries on that.
yes.
Okay, so those who are on the executive committee will meet immediately after this. And with that in mind, if there's no other business before the group, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
No, so moved.
Second, Karen Darch.
You got that, Erin?
Yep, I got that.
And I will do this by a voice vote. All in favor will signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no. And the motion carries. We'll see you in 1 month. And again, executive committee, go to the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.